So we're going to discuss an interesting topic. As devotees, and Kaja was giving me the giving me some context in terms of ISKCON Columbus, and I was really inspired by the real enthusiasm and emphasis on distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. And then this topic came to mind, which is actually internal book distribution. I was watching Memories of Prabhupada, and one of Prabhupada's disciples were recalling a pastime they had with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was asking them about his studying. He said, "You study my books?" And they said to Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, we read your books every single day." And then Prabhupada was even more insistent. He said, "But do you study my books?" Which is very, very interesting. And they were just recalling this pastime. And that Prabhupada was making the point, which I also heard the same point from Tamal Krishna Maharaj. When he was in the UK doing his PhD in Cambridge University, we would sometimes, go to serve him and so on. And one time Prabhupada chastised him, actually. He mentioned this pastime. And Prabhupada told him the same thing that Prabhupada said to this other disciple when he was asked about studying. He said, "You should understand my books like a lawyer knows the law books." There are two types of book distribution, ladies and gentlemen. One type of book distribution, actually, let's go back. There are two types of book distribution, and both of them are profoundly interconnected. Okay, I repeat this point. And this is the seed or the bija of our entire presentation. There are two types of book distribution, and both of them are intimately interconnected and interdependent. One type of book distribution, which is often spoken about, is external book distribution. So in the external book distribution, we are making the endeavor, and we are finding various ways to get people to accept the transcendental literature of Srila Prabhupada. And implicit within that is we want them to read the books. We want them to do more than read the books. We want them to be receptive to the message of the books. And by them being receptive to the message of the books, we want them to align their life with what is given by Prabhupada's books. That is the external book distribution. As important, if in some ways, in various ways, also even more important than the external book distribution, is the internal book distribution. Because actually, it is the internal book distribution that adds to, enhances, and empowers the external book distribution. It's not the only thing that empowers it, but it is one of the key sources of fuel for the external book distribution. So what we wanted to do in this session is focus on this topic that we call internal book distribution. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm just going to ask for a thumbs up that you can see the screen. Fantastic. Okay, good stuff. So there's quite a few things we're going to get through today. I'm going to precede this by just bringing up, a concern. Okay, and this seminar is also meant to connect with a fundamental concern. We have seen in our International Society for Krishna Consciousness that there are some communities not very dynamic, not very dynamic, not very active. There are some communities can be very dynamic, but not necessarily very effective. Srila Prabhupada, he gave this ISKCON movement, and he explained it as a cultural movement for the re-spiritualization of the entire world. That meant that within our communities, that means that within our communities are meant to be both very dynamic and very effective. And the source of that spiritual dynamism, not material dynamism, not mode of passion dynamism, but the source of spiritual dynamism and spiritual effectiveness is realization. What we hope to share with you in this session are some key factors that can literally transform us through the process of realization that comes from the connection, the regular and receptive, not just regular, I repeat that, the regular and receptive contact, study, reading, discussion, etc. of the books of Srila Prabhupada. My own spiritual teacher, my own spiritual master, passed away maybe 17 years ago now. His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. One of his biggest concerns is he was concerned with seeing that there were so many devotees who were not changing, not growing, not transforming. And it is our conviction that this particular topic is one of the key drivers for real, lasting, and deep spiritual transformation. So let's get into it. What we're going to propose here in this seminar is that the study of Prabhupada's books in many situations in our movement is not taking place in the way that it could, if it's taking place at all, okay? And we begin with this particular point. These three areas, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, these are considered to be the different stages through which spiritual or transcendental knowledge becomes realized, okay? So it's not a question here of just reading the books. These three stages also intimately connect with what we understand in the common world right now. It deeply relates to what we understand in modern society, even in terms of what they call neuroscience. So I'm going to be giving you some quotes. We'll be sharing some quotes. We're going to ask you to reflect on your own practices in this area to see where we can take our spiritual realization to the next level. So these three stages are there. Shravana means hearing. Then you have Manana, which means reflection or contemplation. Then we have Nididhyasana, which is application. These three stages, if one engages spiritual knowledge regularly through these three stages within their spiritual life, that process will literally cause the knowledge that one is exposed to increasingly become realized. When I was looking at this the other day, I found some incredible correlations. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is a verse that states that everything can be understood within these three categories of Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So this model is an extremely powerful framework which allows us to analyze a situation and to understand it much more deeply. I was giving a presentation to a group of business leaders, and we were explaining that model. Sambandha Gyan, which is the knowledge, right? So we could say it's knowledge. Abhideya, which is activity. Prayojana, which is outcome or the goal. Here, this Shravana, what is this Shravana? Shravana means I'm hearing. And what am I hearing? I'm hearing this Sambandha Gyan, Okay, I'm hearing this Shabda Brahma, this transcendental sound. Now, most devotees stop there. Prabhupada wanted us to take the entire cycle through. So the second thing, after I've been exposed to this knowledge, then I need to do something with it. Abhideya means activity. What is the Abhideya here? The Abhideya is manana. The first Abhideya is an intellectual activity. Prabhupada makes a point that we should try to understand this philosophy from different angles of vision. That's what it means to contemplate, right? So Prabhupada says something, oh, how does that work? How does that relate to something else? Or how would I explain that to someone else? When Prabhupada says that, what does he mean by that? If I was giving this point in a class, what would be an analogy or a metaphor that I could use which will make it accessible and understandable? So the second stage is manana, contemplation. Another activity is nididhyasana. Okay, so we've read something about Prabhupada saying that there is, that we should rise early. And then when we start to do it and start to do it on a regular basis, then I start to understand the difference that rising early makes. And it's not just something I've read in a book, but I start to feel, wow, it's amazing. When I rise early, I find that my mind is clearer. When I rise early, I find that my chanting is more focused. When I rise early, I find that I'm able to have a more successful day. You start to have additional insight because you're applying something that has been actually stated in our teachings. Now, Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, he mentions these three stages, but he gives a fourth stage. And the fourth stage he gives is Vandanam. He says, or rather, that which this indicates that we can also, and we should also pray. What does prayer do? Prayer is the understanding that along with my own endeavor of hearing, along with my own endeavor of contemplation, along with my own endeavor of application, ultimately, I require the mercy of the devotees, the mercy of Guru, the mercy of Krishna to make any spiritual endeavor fruitful. Okay? So I wanted to begin by mentioning these points because what happens through these different stages is we actually deepen the spiritual samskars within our consciousness. Right now in the self-development industry, literally people will pay hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars across the world for different books, seminars, courses, and techniques all around transformation. Because they know, okay, there's a big gap between where I am and where I could be. So the golden key is, how do I transform? How do I grow? How do I become a better version of myself? And we have that teaching in its original devotional and spiritual form in the pages of the books of Srila Prabhupada. So consider this as an analogy. The Shravana is the voice of the Shastra. The Manana, so when we reflect on that voice, it is like the echo of the voice of that same Shastra. When we engage in Nididhyasana, the application, it is taking that voice and acting on that. So taking the voice as guidance, and then we start to experience what that direction was saying, but we experience it with our entire being because we've applied it, Nididhyasana. And then ultimately, God helps those who help themselves. Krishna gives grace when he sees us making the endeavor to receive his mercy. And this becomes realization. At the time of death, Antekalichamameva smaramutva kalevaram yaprati samadbhavam yati naschasha samsayaha. What we think about at the time of death is going to determine our success or failure in spiritual life. By the regular study of Prabhupada's books, by following these stages, we create these deep samskars, which mean that at the time of death, because we've not only heard, but we've contemplated and we've applied, it means that those impressions will be so deep that at the time of death, we will be able to remember Krishna. And that will literally open the doors to Goloka Vrindavan. So let's get into what this means, and we're going to look at different statements by Prabhupada, and then we'll give some summary benefits before we get into the exercise. So Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 25, verse number 278. I'm not going to read the actual, well, actually, no, I will. I'll read both the translation and the purport. Men become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains, but the devotee who simply eats ordinary grains but does not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, Mahaprabhu, and Krishna gradually become weak and falls down from the transcendental position. However, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his body and mind begin to bloom, and he begins to laugh, sing, and dance. Purport. All the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all the books that have been translated, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus, they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal, blissful life of transcendental pleasure. A very strong statement by Srila Prabhupada. But let's kick off with this particular one. I'm going to ask you this question to begin with, and I just want a show of hands. You can use your the reactions on the Zoom. How many of you have ever known someone who came to Krishna consciousness, and after a while they started to have doubts, and eventually they either became relegated to a lower level of practice or they left completely? Has anyone ever seen that happen? Okay. Interesting. Okay, so this is not unfamiliar to us. I remember it was one of the strangest experience, unusual experience. I was going to Bhaktivedanta Manor. So I was taking the public transport to the manor, and opposite me, when I was on the underground, the subway, right, there were two young ladies, and I had my hand in the bead bag, and they were looking at me, and they were just whispering. And for some reason, it just left an impression. I thought, that's unusual. Not that it's not that it doesn't happen, it hasn't happened before, but for some reason, this was in the morning. For some reason, it just left an impression in my mind. So I was going to the manor, and that was in the morning. Now, in the afternoon, I was coming back from the manor, from Bhaktivedanta Manor, which is one of the temples in the UK. When I was coming back, strangely enough, I saw those same two women, and I was far away from the manor. I was about, let's say, an hour away. And so I was standing waiting for a bus, and these two same women were there, and they approached me, right? And they asked me, "What are you doing?" You know? And I had my beads, and I was telling them I was chanting Hare Krishna. Now, what was really interesting is that one of these two women, she told me that she had been a devotee. Yeah, and these were Western women, two Western women. One of them said to me, they had been a devotee. Then they said to me, not only had they been a devotee, they had been full-time. They were actually living in the house of their spiritual master, along with other devotees, serving them on a day-by-day basis, right? And then they told me, well, it's because one of them, it wasn't two of them, well, there was two together, but one of them had been a devotee. And then this one who had been a devotee then started telling me that actually the reason why she left Krishna consciousness, she said to me, I started discovering that the Bhagavad Gita and the books of Krishna consciousness their information had been taken from the Bible. That's what she told me, which is completely untrue, right? She told me that. And then I was just saying, no, this is actually not the case. And I was explaining the logic behind it. The Bhagavad Gita is much older. The knowledge is actually, to be honest, in many ways, I'm from a Christian background, so I knew that's definitely wrong. Now, what was so interesting, at one point, the lady who was trying to disagree with me, she turned to her friend and said, he can't hear because he's been chanting the mantra. You know, that's what she actually said. And what I understood from her discussion was that there had been some sentiment in her service. You understand the point? There had been sentiment in her service. In other words, the activity of service was there, but it lacked the deep understanding as to why we were doing what we're doing. And it is for that reason that something as basic as being able to differentiate between Bhagavad Gita and other literatures and other traditions, something as basic as being able to see clearly that this knowledge is not the same in detail and also in some cases in principle as the knowledge in this other literature, meant that there was some sentiment there. In this particular purport, Prabhupada is making the point that, you see, again, going back to this model, Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya, Prayojana. Your Abhideya, our Abhideya, is based upon our Sambandha Gyan. The quality of our practice is based upon our conception of the mantra, of ourselves, of Krishna. I was thinking about this the other day. Okay, let's look at this as a scenario. If you turned around now and Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, suddenly appeared in front of you, would you be attentive? Would you notice? Yes or no? Yeah, right? If he appeared in front of you, right, and you could see him, you would be like, wow, that's, you'd be attentive. Okay, so notice this. We're saying that if Krishna appeared in front of our eyes and we could see him, we think, yeah, of course I pay attention. It's, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, etc., etc. Okay, now let's look at this next point. Every day, either in the temple or in our homes, wherever we are, we chant the holy names of Krishna. Has anyone on this call been inattentive when they've been chanting the names of Krishna? Yes or no? Anyone? Okay, I think we could all safely say we've had that experience. Now, this is where the conception comes in. We accept philosophically that the holy name is non-different from Krishna. If I accept philosophically that the holy name is non-different from Krishna, what that implies is that my reaction to the holy name should be as good as attentive as my reaction to the visual presence of Krishna. But so often it's not. What that means is that we accept it philosophically, but this conception is not deeply within our hearts. And that is where the disconnect comes within our community so often. We have a philosophy that we accept on one level and sometimes often superficially, but it's not entered into the heart. And what Prabhupada is speaking about here is that by the regular, consistent study, that takes the knowledge, it deepens the knowledge slowly, slowly. It goes through the level of conscious awareness, deep into the heart. And that is why it's not just a question of reading sporadically, but it's a question of studying regularly. By that deep, consistent study, we are able to transform, and we're able to avoid exactly what is being spoken about here, that we just end up going backwards where we had this belief, I believe that, I believe it when I'm around my friends who are devotees, I believe it when I'm in the temple, but it hasn't penetrated the heart. And you can see, if anyone wants to know what is within my heart, all we need to do is look at how we act on a regular day-to-day basis. How we act, the abideya of our actions, our day-to-day interactions and actions, they are actually a symptom of, and they indicate what's within our deep sambandha. They indicate what we deeply believe, not superficially, not the ISKCON cliches, but what is believed deep, deep down. So transformation means to enter into the vault of the heart. And it is done, one of the keys is through the regular contact of the heart with transcendental knowledge in a way that's deeply digested. Again, hearing it, contemplating it, applying it, and praying for mercy for that knowledge to be realized. Okay, I'm going to move on swiftly. So, this is a letter. I'll just read part of it. One makes his advancement in Krishna consciousness by giving up voluntarily his attachment to material nature or maya, and such renunciation is called tapasya. But we are not very willing to perform austerities without good reason. Therefore, any man with scientific and philosophical good brain, such as your good self, must appreciate first what is the transcendental knowledge. If you get knowledge, automatically tapasya will follow, and then you make your advancement in spiritual life. See, this is Prabhupada's phenomenal insight. He's giving a means. See, we often think it's hard to be Krishna conscious. It's so hard. But what we don't understand is it's the wrong focus. Any devotee who focuses on how hard it is has got the wrong idea. We don't need to worry about how hard it is to become Krishna conscious. Why? Because the only person who spreads Krishna consciousness and the only person who makes people Krishna conscious is Krishna. What we need to do is take the medicine as best we can so that Krishna will see they really want this gift, and then I'll give it to them. Okay? So here, for example, again, incredibly, this is very profound. If you get this point, many devotees I see, they're trying to be detached, trying to, stay away from temptation. Now, look what Prabhupada is saying here. He's saying here, if you get knowledge, automatically tapasya will follow, and then you make your advancement in spiritual life. He's saying it's not just a question of your willpower, it's a question of your darshan, of your perception. Because what does that mean? If I understand something deeply, not only will I see the object, but in the same vision, I will see the object and the outcome. Okay? For example, my favorite drink is mango lassi. Okay? I've spoken about this on other classes, so I'm just going to put it out there. Now, let's say that mango lassi was your favorite drink. Okay? And let's say that in Columbus, there was a heat wave. It's just been a hot few weeks. You're sweating, you're hot, you feel thirsty. And then someone puts in front of you a glass of mango lassi. Now, you know what it's like when you see the adverts, right? It's not just a glass of mango lassi. It's got that a few drops of water, right? Running down it, just to make you understand just how cool and inviting this glass of mango lassi is, okay? Now, if someone offers you that glass of mango lassi, and it's prasadam, it's been offered properly, all the prayers have been done, Krishna's accepted it, okay? So there's no worry there, okay? Would you take it, yes or no? Yeah, naturally, right? Okay, now let's take it a step further. Let's say you're about to drink that cool glass of mango lassi in the hot Columbus sun, okay? But just before you're about to put that glass to your lips, someone says to you, oh, by the way, just to let you know that that mango lassi is also laced with a slow-acting poison that will kill you in 24 hours from now. Would you still take the mango lassi? Yes or no? No one would take it, right? So let's look at this. You have the object. That's the first scenario. You have the object and you know you're thirsty, you want something to drink. So you have the object before you. That's one vision. Second situation, you have the object and the outcome. You not only know what the object is, but you know the effect that the object will have on you in the long term. Okay? The transcendental knowledge, it does this. The spiritual literatures of Srila Prabhupada are like having an X-ray vision. When I first came to Krishna consciousness, I was at university, so I stopped eating meat and I was studying and I would be with my friends and they would sit there watching me. And I'm eating this non-vegetarian food and they're watching me. And they're eating their meat and they're watching me. And they're waving their chicken at me and saying, "You sure? Come on, you know you want it. Come on. You know you want it." And I had absolutely no attraction. And I was looking at that meat and I was thinking, I would not put a dead body in my mouth. There's no way we're putting a dead corpse in my mouth. No way. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't like, oh, I'm holding myself back. They thought I was holding myself back, but eventually they could see he's got no interest. Why? Same principle. Not only are you seeing the situation, seeing the object, you see the entire ramification of that particular interaction, right? You see the object for what it is. It's a dead body. Do you really want to put a dead body in your mouth? Hell no. You see also the repercussions of it. Taking birth in a lower species, being slaughtered. So the knowledge completely transforms the activity. And it does it in such a graceful and natural way. It's not so it takes Krishna consciousness to a different level. It's no longer just a question of pushing back. I want to do it, but I shouldn't because someone told me or I read somewhere that it's wrong. The difference is this transcendental vision that comes from transcendental knowledge. And the more that it's practiced, naturally, it reorientates the individual in a completely different way. Let's move on. Letter to Dayananda. Yes, reading my books will help you. Philosophy must be there, but if you do not also apply the philosophy by participating in all temple affairs like rising early, attending Mangalati, performing devotional service, then simply learning the philosophy will have no effect. This is to emphasize this nididhyasan. There's not just a question of reading, it's a question of acting on what we have read and starting to do that on a regular basis, which makes the philosophy have effect. Okay, let's look at another quote. Letter to Amarendra. So if you study my books very carefully, then I'm sure you'll find out the means for applying this Krishna consciousness philosophy in all spheres of life. There is no limitation. Simply, it requires a little common sense practicality. This is really important. One of the things that, to be honest, have been exciting me for decades, actually, is how to take the teaching and to apply it practically. I mean, if you apply this stuff practically, I mean, what it does for your faith. See, faith is the building block of everything. The more you apply the philosophy, the more that you see that it practically works. The more that you see that it practically works, what it does is it makes you more confident in your Krishna consciousness. Because when you apply something that you've read, it's no longer a theory. You know, that's true. Prabhupada said that. I followed what he said and it worked exactly like Prabhupada said. Wow. So then what happens is, this is how internal and external book distribution connect. Your book distribution externally is highly empowered by your book distribution internally. It is the conviction of the internal book distribution that makes you a powerful external book distributor. The two things are deeply connected. Let us move on. So, another quote from Prabhupada. Our advancement in Krishna consciousness is made possible in two ways, by knowledge and renunciation, gyan and tyag or tapasya. The more we become renounced from this material world, the more we advance in Krishna consciousness, but we are only able to make such sacrifices and perform tapasya if we have got knowledge. I'll tell you honestly, I feel this deep fire of conviction in the potential of the devotees and especially the future generation. But what I also see is that in many cases, devotees are not trained. So what can happen if you're not trained, if we're not trained, is you hear the same thing 1,000 times, but nothing changes. What we need to do more and more is to really sell the philosophy to our own hearts. We live in a world where everything is about advertising. Image is everything. What we need to do is to really become convinced of the philosophy by selling the philosophy to our own hearts. And the books of Prabhupada, the letters of Prabhupada, the writings of Prabhupada, they do this. There's a difference between having Krishna consciousness as a belief and having Krishna consciousness as a conviction. When an individual is deeply convinced, not convinced on the surface, superficially, but deeply convinced, it changes everything. So just like we say internal book distribution, external book distribution, you could also term it external preaching and internal preaching. The more that you're convinced of the teachings by the studying, the more you will have the potency and the intelligence and the knowledge to convince others as well. This is how the power comes. So consider Prabhupada's books from this point onwards, just like when you have like this power bank. So sometimes people will carry like their own spare battery for their phone, right? So you're out somewhere and your phone's running out of power, and you just connect your phone via the lead to a power bank, to a battery that you carry with you. Consider Prabhupada's books like a spiritual battery, powering the individual with conviction, knowledge, not just knowledge, but also intelligence, also focus that can allow them to do transformative things in their own life and in the life of others. So what we want to do is give you a summary of some of the key benefits, and this is not even exhaustive, but a summary of some of the key benefits of reading Prabhupada's books, studying Prabhupada's books on a regular basis. So you can see here, and these are some things we've spoken about already. So we get this discrimination. By reading Prabhupada's books, we can see things clearly, we can see through, not just the object, not just the activity, but the long-term ramifications. We mentioned how it helps us to be austere. Prabhupada gave that in the quote. It helps us to be more austere, not in a forced way, but it's just, I don't need it, I'm detached because I understand what it is. I understand what will truly make me happy and what will not truly make me happy. In this way, Prabhupada's books increase our spiritual strength and spiritual acceleration. It also, therefore, gives us patience because it helps us to move to the mode of goodness as we come through goodness to the transcendental platform. So the easiest way to cultivate the mode of goodness and beyond to go to transcendence is the regular study of Srila Prabhupada's books. And in that way, Prabhupada's books give regular inspiration, but they also do something even more. Many of you, I'm sure, have experienced this. If you regularly perform devotional service sincerely, because of the purity of the heart, Chaito Darpana Marjanam, you're able to more easily understand or gain the insights coming from the Supersoul. And what do we mean by insight from the Supersoul? We mean exactly what Krishna says. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayanti te. He says, those who serve me with devotion, I give them the knowledge by which they can come to me. So you may have seen it. You're on Sankirtan. Someone says they don't want to take a book for a certain reason, and Krishna just gives you the words. He just gives you the insight. I'll say this to him. And you say what you get in the heart, and suddenly the person is going to take a book. He gives you the inspiration. but that comes because we're completely tuning in. And the books of Prabhupada allow us to tune in to the same internal voice, because the words on the page are Krishna's voice. And within your heart, there's also Krishna's voice. So by attuning to his voice externally on the pages of Prabhupada's books, you're more able to hear his voice internally as well. Okay, some more benefits. We talked about conviction. We talked about confidence. Interesting point on this. The Goswamis say that the transcendental knowledge, right? The knowledge gives virya and smriti. Okay, virya means drive, determination, right? You could even say it relates to confidence, conviction. And smriti means the ability to hold the meanings of the teachings within one's mind. Okay, very, very powerful. So that confidence, the drive, the enthusiasm has a lot to do with the knowledge, the spiritual cultivation of transcendental knowledge. Okay. It gives faith. So actually, that I go back. The Goswami said that the faith, Shraddha, right, gives virya and smriti. And the actual, but we also know, and the reason why they're linked, Prabhupada says faith comes from hearing. Okay, hearing submissively from the proper source. And we'll show you that quote if we have some time. So as the faith builds up, one becomes steady, nishta. Okay, and the last point, ultimately, it helps us to become more attached to Krishna. So these are just some of the benefits. This isn't even exhaustive. These are just some of the benefits that come by the regular study of Prabhupada's books. I'm almost finished, and then we'll open up for questions. So I'll just draw your attention, because we're short of time, towards the bottom of this quote. I'll start here. No one can be pure in action who is not pure in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating. But somehow or other, if someone hears with rapt attention from the right person, at the very beginning, one can assuredly see Lord Sri Krishna in person in the pages of Bhagavatam. That's Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 3, text number 44 in the purple. Okay, this idea of not just hearing, but hearing with rapt attention is very, very powerful. So we're almost at the end. What I'd like us to do, in the spirit of what we've been discussing, is to get us to just take a moment to think about, how do we make this real? The idea here is not that we go to another seminar, another class, it's nice, we heard something, everyone goes home and nothing changes. But rather, I want us to do a little bit of introspection here. I want you to just write this down. I'll give you literally 2 minutes. Think about your own study habits of Prabhupada's books. What are the key obstacles? What holds us back from doing this in the way that we know would be best for us? That's question number 1. And question number 2, what could we do to take our studying of Prabhupada's books from where it is to the next level? And I'll give a quick example. I found that for me, one of the most powerful things that work for me a lot is not only reading, but then discussing what I've read with someone else. So for good periods of time, I've read, and then I've read with friends, with devotee friends, and then we'll read a section, then we'll discuss it. Another thing that I did, and I got this from my own spiritual master, he shared that one thing that we could do to make the studying even more interactive and absorbing was, as we read, and when we come across a relevant point, then we would think, how would I explain this to someone else? Because then we're engaging the heart, we're engaging the intelligence. And then, of course, Lord Chaitanya sees this person wants to understand the teachings, not just for themselves, but so that they can share it with other people. And that is the mood of Sankirtan. And by that mood, we will then be given additional realization, because we're going to try to facilitate others coming to Krishna as well. So just take 1 or 2 minutes, write down, what are the obstacles to my study? my regular study of Prabhupada's books. Maybe you're doing very well in that area, which is fine. And then the second is, given some of these obstacles, what can I do so that I'm regularly studying? So hearing it or reading it, reflecting on it, and where relevant, applying it more. We'll give you literally maybe 1 more minute, and then we're going to continue. 1 minute over to you. Okay, so what we're going to do is end with a particular quote. Let's go to the end. So this quote is actually from Krishna book. Prabhupada writes the following. We therefore request everyone to take advantage of this great transcendental literature. One will find that by reading one page after another, an immense treasure of knowledge in art, science, literature, philosophy, and religion will be revealed. And ultimately, by reading this one book, Krishna, love of Godhead, will fructify. Wonderful quote from Srila Prabhupada. So we hope we've given you some things to think about. The power, the opportunity of becoming transformed through the cultivation of transcendental knowledge, which means to study, the regular studying of Prabhupada's books. I'm going to pause here and ask, are there any questions or comments, please? Yes. Mataji Sumitra.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, this was a wonderful talk, very thought-provoking. My question is, and I'm being very, very honest here, sometimes when I read the purports, there comes a sense of, well, I've come across this before, or it feels a little bit repetitive, and sometimes that kind of leads to boredom. And it's up to me to recognize, okay, if this is not capturing your attention, there's plenty of books Prabhupada has written. Just pick another one and pick another chapter. But that insight doesn't always come. So that's sometimes one of the struggle. That's one struggle. The other struggle is sometimes what is written in the purport, I have not yet experienced it. So for example, Bhakti is joyful when it's performed ahaitukim apratihata. But I'm not there yet. I still have a lot of neither uninterrupted nor unmotivated. So it also leads to discouragement. So the book says I should be here, but I'm here. And how is this gap ever going to be bridged in this lifetime? So how do you wrestle with those feelings? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Just give me a moment. So there's a couple of things to bear in mind here. Actually, the scriptures give something for all levels. Okay, there are specific things in the scriptures which are meant for the Kanishta Adhikari. There are specific things in the scriptures which are meant for the Madhyam Adhikari. There are specific things in the scriptures which are meant, or which will be distinctly understood by the Uttama Adhikari. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says one of the causes of fall down is to act below one's level of adhikar or qualification, and it's also a cause of fall down to act above one's level of qualification. So the point is, what's meant to happen in a wholesome study is that the things which, let's say, are on our level that we can connect with, they become a source of let's say, familiarity, and they're relevant. These are things which are relevant for me. I apply them now. There are some things which may be above our level, right? But that should become a source of inspiration, just like a guiding star. This is somewhere I could be one day, okay? And the things which may be more basic that we've gone past, that will be something that we share with people who are junior to us, for whom that instruction is relevant. Okay, so it requires us to reorder the way that we see things. Everything's relevant for different purposes. You see, for example, someone may be new, like it may be that, you know, we don't eat meat already, right? We've already got to that stage, etc., etc. But for someone who's new, it may be giving them the arguments and the explanation as to why it is not good to eat animals. Okay, so it's not something that we're going to apply now because our diets change. We only have prasadam, but for that person, it's relevant. Now, the trick here, therefore, is as you read, is to think, how can I apply this if it's something that's applicable? So some things maybe, you know what, this is something that I can apply by teaching it to younger people or people who are new. This is something I can apply because I can do this, or I can do this better myself now. Prabhupada has deliberately repeated certain things, by the way. Okay, the repetition is to deepen the samskar, because what will happen is the deepest impressions will come up at the time of death. So please don't think that because it's repeated, I already know that. It's good actually to hear it again, to deepen it, deepen it, deepen it. They I don't know if this is global, but at least in the UK, male airplane pilots, if a plane crashes, the plane has what's called a black box, and it records all the situation that was happening before the plane crashed, and they can use that to find out what happened. And what they found is with many of the male pilots, the last thing they call out before they die is they call out for their mum. You see? Now what that means is that was a deeper samskar. So you can have this guy, he's got his own family, etc., etc. But at the time of death, the deeper samskar, he's still ultimately, in heart, he's still a mummy's boy. He thinks about his mummy. So in a similar way, the repetition serves that particular purpose, is to deepen. So it's not that we need to actually necessarily get around it. But what you can do is you can also, everyone's an individual. We have to find a way of studying that works for us. That's the bottom line to it. So if one way doesn't quite work for you, you can try another approach to study, right? As I said, one suggestion is, I'll just show you this quote actually. One suggestion is this. I found this quote earlier today. Or actually, I came across it years ago and it always stayed in my mind. This is a letter to Hridayananda Maharaj, dated January 6, 1972. I won't read all of it, but just look at this point. And you must all study very scrutinizingly all the books, so when the need arises, you can repeat in your own words their purport. Also, I will be very pleased if you contribute articles to Back to God. Now, this is a line that really always stood out to me when I read it years ago. By writing regularly, what you read will become realized. Okay, so one thing that I found really helpful is to study, write notes. What stands out to me? How do I explain this? Is there an interesting metaphor? How does it link to other things that I know? And to make the process of studying much more interactive in that way. So I hope that gives you some answers to your question. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I saw Kajol's hand up, and then we'll go to Rukmini.
Hare Krishna, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I learned so much. I have two questions, actually. The first is, so, you know, sometimes, well, at least I think like sometimes Srila Prabhupada's books, scriptures, it seems a little utopian or, you know, very idealistic. So how do we try to bring that real to the ideal, you know? So you don't have to practice, you know.
Your line's cutting out a little bit, Kajol. Could you repeat what you just said? How do we bring
real to the ideal, you know? So we're living our life, right? Which is not perfect. But when we read the scriptures, it seems very perfect at times. So, or how to lead a life that is somewhat perfect. So how do we bring that real to the ideal?
Very good question. Well, I would challenge that, because if you read Bhagavatam, there's so many, and Prabhupada's books, there are so many examples of people who go through difficulties, go through challenges. We have the Pandavas, right? Their trials and tribulations. We have the fall down of Ajamil. We have Gajendra the elephant, who's actually being who's being beaten by a crocodile. He's being bitten and he's dying. So many different things. So if we look through the teachings as a whole, literally, to be honest with you, and one day someone will do this as a proper study, you can find in its archetype form every type of circumstance in the human condition. You can find it in its archetypical form in the Bhagavatam, right? Even, I mean, you know, you have the abusive parent. Who's the abusive parent? Hiranyakashipu, okay? Trying to kill his own son. It's all there. You have the family feud, Kauravas versus the Pandavas, right? Every type of human condition experience is there in its archetypical form, to show us that how in a number of different circumstances and situations we can move forward progressively in Krishna consciousness. So yes, there are things that people aspire towards, but we also see what happens when people behave improperly. So a careful study, especially of the Bhagavatam, will show you that. We have the example of Duryodhan. You know, he behaves so improperly. Dhritarashtra, what happens to them? Yeah. So all of these different things are there. We see the demons, Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, Dantavakra, Shishupal, so many different examples are there. And so it will show us what happens when we behave properly, which is more the aspirational, but it will also protect us by showing us the nivriti. What happens to an individual who interacts improperly, whether out of lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, illusion, whatever it is, it shows the negative consequences as well. And in that way, it helps us to keep on the right path. So that is how I would respond to your question, Kajol. And thank you for that question. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes, this is perfect. Thank you. And just one more question. You know, last week we had Sutapa Prabhu, who's also part of the School of Bhakti, and I know you are part of the School of Bhakti as well. So perhaps at the end, maybe you can just give us information about that and the courses that's available at the School of Bhakti. That would be nice. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm gonna have to put a little disclosure. They put me down as a teacher. I only found out that I was down as a teacher on their website the other day. I have done sessions. I'm being very honest with you. I have done sessions for Bhakti, but yeah, I'm not actually like an integral part of it. But they do some fantastic courses, and yes, you know, credit where credit's due. They do some fantastic courses, and I very much salute what they do, because in relation to this talk,
perfect.
I mean the potential for the devotional community. I mean, I'll be honest, I sometimes go to different communities around the world and I can actually tell that they're not studying, because I could understand that if they did study regularly, they'd be their enthusiasm would be much stronger, their understanding will be much deeper. I mean, I can't emphasize this to you enough. One of the things that Prabhupada's books do, this Chaitodharpana Marchama is not a small thing. When people have a clear consciousness, they can see the world more accurately and more clearly, and it's that lens that becomes the basis of all the decisions that we make. So you can literally avoid making bad decisions if you have a more purified consciousness. So we're missing out. I mean, and it's so easy it's so accessible, it's all completely within reach. But because we don't understand the value of Prabhupada's books, we think it's, yes, if I read it, it's nice. If I don't read it, it's not a big deal. No, if you read it, you will speed up. And I'll be very honest with you. By the study of Prabhupada's books, when you look out into the world, it will be a different world that you'll see. Prabhupada says, we see the world according to our fund of knowledge. And that's why Prabhupada often talks about people who have a poor fund of knowledge. And that's really important, because everything that we see, every object, we attribute a certain understanding to the object, to the activity, to the person. And if that knowledge that we attribute to a person, an object, a situation is false, if it's ignorance, then if we engage based upon ignorance, we guarantee our own long-term suffering. And sometimes not even long-term, you know? I'll give you one example. in Ayurvedic literature, I think it's the Charaka Samhita, it explains how epidemics come. Right, we've been living in this coronavirus epidemic for some pandemic for some time. It explains how epidemics come. It explains that when the leadership are corrupt and they behave improperly, that pollutes the ether, which allows viruses and epidemics to spread en masse. Now, if people knew that, this is so subtle. You can't get this by empirical observation. One has to get this knowledge from this descending process. One has to get the knowledge from the source who created the entire world, who is Krishna, ultimately. So what we have, I have to tell you honestly, it's to say it's worth billions is an understatement. It's an understatement. People make self-development courses using one or two sentences from one page of Prabhupada's books, and they will sell a course, and all it has is one cent, ultimately one piece of knowledge, and they will sell it for millions. They'll pad it out with a few stories and one or two exercises, and people will be literally fainting. We have the whole thing in concentrated form, and we don't know what to do with it. That's the real sadness. Anyway. Thank you very much for that, for your question, Kajal. I'm going to ask Rukmini David Dasi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Really inspiring. I think, is this Rukmini who I met on a youth retreat many years ago? Or is it? No, okay, maybe a different.
Sorry, that would have been wonderful, but I haven't.
No worries. I just know it's called Rukmini, but it's a different Rukmini. I think it's a different Prabhupada disciple, actually. Yes. Hare Krishna, how can I serve you?
Hare Krishna, you already have through this wonderful discourse, Prabhu. So I have a question. So I really vibed with your presentation of the importance of knowledge, and especially of studying with attention and deeply, and with these processes of Shravanam and Mananam and Nididhyasanam. And on the other hand, so we need to make that knowledge our own and to make it real in our lives. But on the other hand, Srila Prabhupada talks very often about the process of speculative knowledge. So here's one famous verse, 10:14:3, that begins Jnane Prayasam. Those who, even while remaining situated in their established social positions, throw away the process of speculative knowledge, and with their body, words, and mind, offer all respects to descriptions of your personality and activities, dedicating their lives to these narrations, which are vibrated by you personally and by your pure devotees, certainly conquer your lordship, although you are otherwise unconquerable by anyone within the three worlds. So this is spoken by Lord Brahma, who is the most knowledgeable person to Lord Krishna. So I mean, if we read Srila Prabhupada's books, we can see that he says over and over again, and that's, about speculative knowledge. But what does that really mean? How do we really differentiate that practically?
Fantastic question. First of all, thank you for your question. It's a really great question. To answer that, I'm going to share my screen again, because this is one of my favorite. Ever since I came across this is a purple. First Canto Bhagavatam, chapter 4, text number 1 in the purple. I'm just going to read part of it because it relates to your question, Rukmini. So Prabhupada writes, in a meeting of learned men, where there are congratulations or addresses for the speaker, the qualifications of the congratulators should be as follows. He must be the leader of the house and an elderly man. He must be vastly learned also. Sri Shonaka Rishi had all these qualifications, and thus he stood up to congratulate Sri Sutta Goswami when he expressed his desire to present Srimad Bhagavatam exactly as he had heard it from Shukadev Goswami, and also realized it personally. Now, the next line is really what stood out to me in relation to your question. Personal realization does not mean that one should, out of vanity, attempt to show one's own learning by trying to surpass the previous acharya. He must have full confidence in the previous acharya, and at the same time, he must realize the subject matter so nicely that he can present the matter for the particular circumstances in a suitable manner. The original purpose of the text must be maintained. That's the first part. So the original purpose of the text must be maintained, that Prabhupada says. So the goal of that teaching should be intact. It shouldn't lead people to materialism. It should lead people on that journey towards Krishna. They should come close to Krishna. Now, Prabhupada goes on to say, no obscure meaning should be screwed out of it. right? So we shouldn't just try to, that's when it becomes speculative. So we're just coming up with a completely different conclusion, some obscure meaning which you can't connect to what's really been written. But Prabhupada goes on further. He says, yet it should be presented in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience. This is called realization. So I repeat that, presented in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience. So there's two things in communication. One, we want to pick people up where they are. That's one aspect of communication. The second aspect is that we want to pick people up so we can take them to the healthy destination of Krishna. So it is completely acceptable to maybe speak on something that relates to the individual, right? So Prabhupada, one of his disciples, I think it was, who told Prabhupada, he admitted to Prabhupada that he used to sell drugs, right? And then Prabhupada's response is, yeah, I also was a drug dealer. Now, Prabhupada was a pharmacist, okay? So he's not that kind of drug dealer, but he's making a connection. One of my mentors put it very nicely. Actually, was it a mentor that maybe I read this quote? They said that the art of communication is not as much transmission. It's not what I'm saying as reception. It's what you're hearing. It's what you're receiving. So to your point, it should be aligned with the teaching, but the teaching is very deep. Our philosophy is so vast. I've been watching these memories of Prabhupada. Sometimes Prabhupada, he was speaking to some elderly, I think it was a woman, and the first thing he asked her, he said, I've got my own teeth. Do you have your own teeth? Now, you could say, what has that got? That's got nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. No, it actually has, because it's the purpose, right? The purpose is one. When Prabhupada wanted them to make the Vedic planetarium, what does he tell them to do? He doesn't say just build it as an Indian temple. He says, look at the architecture. He gives certain buildings around the world, including, for example, St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Why? Because Prabhupada knows that the Indians want to be like the Westerners. So he's going to build a Vedic planetarium in India using architecture, which is very Western and global, to make it even more of a wow factor to fulfill the purpose of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in attracting everyone to Krishna consciousness. So according to your understanding and realization, there's more scope if one has that realization and training, and also where one is not sure. And I would even say, even if you are sure, and it's a gray area, one simply has to check in. Is this a philosophical, is this a speculation? Is this a mental speculation? Am I, as is said in this purple, am I coming to conclusions or creating meanings which are vastly away from the text? Or is it actually, as Prabhupada also says here, I'm presenting it in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience, which is where we have realization. Okay? And the most important aspect of all of this is one has to maintain the purpose. That's very, very important, because there are many angles of vision in different aspects of the teachings. And sometimes, to be honest, there's more than one angle, and it may even be contradictory. They can both be right, they can both be contradictory, but the purpose absolutely has to be maintained. We have to speak, teach, even you can say something that is scripturally true, but it's inappropriate. Right? And I'm sure we've all seen that sometimes, right? We can say something that's scripturally true, but it doesn't fulfill the compassionate purpose of the Bhagavatam, which is to encourage people to become more Krishna conscious. There are sometimes devotees who will beat each other over the head with the philosophy, right? So we can find things we can use to put people down, make people feel disenfused and so on, whereas actually it has to be for the purpose, of bringing people closer to Krishna. I hope does that address some of the things you were trying to ask about?
Yes, that's wonderful. That really brings it down to earth and makes the point. And what you just said just reminded me of there's this purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya-lila, chapter 19, and I think it's around 159 or 160, where Srila Prabhupada Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur talks about Jiva Hingsa, which is violence against the living entity. And violence against the living entity is not just eating meat, but it's actually keeping them away from Krishna consciousness. So what you just said is so important, that this anti-preaching is actually a kind of violence.
Absolutely.
So that really makes it much more clear. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
No, thank you so much for your question. I can see Harry, you have a question, and then Kalindi.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Nice to see you again, Prabhu. I've been.
I recognized you. I'm sure we met before. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah, I met you at the second mantra retreat in New Vrindavan.
That's it.
Yeah, it's really nice to see you, Prabhu. I've been listening to, during lockdown, I was always listening to your lectures about the glories and potency of Bhagavatam and different lectures. Thank you for all the service you do. Thank you for the Nectarian class today. When you told us to reflect on this question on how to make it real, I could see that one of the biggest obstacles in my life, because in reading for a lot of devotees, is it can be put off to later. How our spiritual master orders us to chant 16 rounds minimum. We get those 16 rounds done, and we put down the bead bag. We did our quota, and that's it for the day. We can follow the 4 regular principles. But reading is something that can be put off for days, months, years, because there's no strict restriction or regulation that was put in at the time of initiation. So my question is, I guess it comes down to a question of urgency. How do we get that mood of, we don't have much time? Like I always think, I'm 22. I have a whole life left to live. Why do I have to read about so many sometimes difficult passages of the Bhagavatam talking about death? That's way longer. But how do we imbibe that sense of urgency when reading Srila Prabhupada's books, that okay, I need to read this and understand it so I can go back to guided as soon as possible?
I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to reframe your question. I would say the question is, what would be a powerful enough inspiration for me as an individual, based upon where I am in my spiritual life, that will cause me to regularly read Prabhupada's books? Okay? So that's the point to bear in mind. So we know, again, going back to this model, Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, the fact that we don't read, what we're really saying is, I'm not convinced that this is so important. You see? We actually have a lack of conviction that it's not, it's nice, you read, I know some people who read, they don't seem to be doing any better than I'm doing. It doesn't seem to be much, adding much value. So we're not convinced, and that's why we don't do it. And it's a deep thing. In any situation where you see someone is not doing something and they have capacity to do it, it means that they don't consider it's actually very important, right? Now, there's a few things to bear in mind here. One, if you find someone who has tremendous enthusiasm and taste for reading, studying Prabhupada's books, and you associate with them and you're receptive, what will happen is their enthusiasm and conviction can enter into your heart. That's why within our tradition, we always emphasize association. Yeah. And it's but we don't do, as devotees, we don't know the science of it. What happens in Krishna consciousness, the teachings of Prabhupada, he's such a brilliant person, to be honest. He's such a genius that he's written his books in such a way that the beginner will read something, they'll get one understanding. The person who's been reading longer, they'll read the same thing and they'll get a much deeper understanding. And someone who's even more advanced, they'll read it and they'll get an even deeper understanding. The books are actually responsive to consciousness. To be really honest with you, the books are actually respond to the consciousness of the individual and the grace of the devotees upon the individual as well. Okay, and the effort of the individual. All 3 factors play a role. So to your point, you could do a couple of things. One, you could associate with devotees who have that taste for studying Prabhupada's books, right? By that association, and if you're receptive, something will enter in. That can happen. You can also look at your own life and look back and think, when was I most enthusiastic to study? What was causing me to feel that sense of enthusiasm for studying, and how can I recreate some of those circumstances, both internally or externally? Okay, that's another thing you can do. I'm a strong believer, because I really feel this, that Krishna and Prabhupada, they're always present. Even if you don't have taste for something, you can always pray regularly to Prabhupada. Prabhupada, I would love to have taste for your books. Please give me a taste for studying your books. And that's the author of the books. He can give you kripa. He can give you taste in that sense. He can give you that mercy if you beg him. Okay. So even if we don't have a desire, we can have the desire to have the desire. Okay. But we just have to start somewhere, you know, like that. Another thing that you may want to try is group study. I've had some really wonderful times where I'm reading some spiritual book and I'm discussing it with a friend. So we get together regularly, and then we'll read together. He'll read a paragraph, then we'll discuss it. Then I'll read the paragraph, then we'll discuss it. That's another way. So there are actually countless ways. I'm just giving you some ideas, but I'd ask you to tune into. So we've given the whole series of possibilities. Then you should tune in. And this is a good last step in any area of spiritual life. The last step is to personalize it. Of all these possible approaches, which one will be the most appropriate and also inspiring that will work for me at this point in my spiritual life? I gave a class at the Manor a while ago, and I was saying how our movement, you'll see often, they'll see there's so many things to be done in this movement. We need to distribute more books. We need to push out distribution. The devotees will look at will notice there's so many things to be done. And then we make the last mistake. Of all the things that need to be done, we just jump into anything. That's where the mode of passion or ignorance comes in. What we're meant to do is we see everything that's meant to be done. And then the last step is, of all the things that are meant to be done, which of these should I be doing? Right? That last step is meant to be personal. And then it would work. And this is what Prabhupada meant when he said that we are impersonalists. We still have this impersonalism. He wasn't just speaking about the Mayavadis, he's speaking about the sadhakas too. And then when we don't apply things personally, then it doesn't work so well. And when it doesn't work so well, then we think, oh, this Krishna consciousness, oh, it's such a headache, oh, it's so hard. No. It's because we didn't apply it properly. Yeah? We don't apply it. And that's where there's a huge opportunity in our movement, right? See, even this, I haven't told you anything you've not heard before. We've all heard about studying Prabhupada's books, but we're trying to do it in such a way that you actually think, okay, what does that mean practically? Where will I find the time to do it? What are the obstacles? What are the solutions for me? Right? So it goes beyond the stage of thought into the stage or the realm of activity. Yeah. Okay. One thing that I always also do, every day I'll create a schedule for my day. And so I'll put it into the schedule, right? Because otherwise, if it's just like, oh, I'll squeeze it in somewhere, it may not happen. What Maya will do, I was giving a talk on New Year's resolutions. I think I think we did something at the beginning of this year, but we've done something in previous years. And it was based upon some classes that I had also heard from my spiritual master on this topic. He said, if you don't plan, Maya will plan for you. And I've seen that in the life of devotees. It's just like the whole day's free. That, they just do something when they feel like it's very kind of laissez-faire, very drifting. So what happens is, from the moment you wake up, Maya says, oh, there's an emergency, you need to do this. Then your friend calls, oh, you should just talk to them. And then someone else is like, oh, someone had a bad day and they want to talk to you. And before you know it, the day actually is just gone. And she's very good like that. I've seen that. It's just keep them busy. I mean, first thing is, make them an atheist. All right, we couldn't do that. Okay, then make them a hypocrite. Yeah, I mean, believe in God, but you have to do like 16 rounds every day. I mean, come on, let's not be fanatical, Prabhu. Like that. So it's just one thing after another. And if she can't do that, then it gets more subtle. Okay, all right, we couldn't stop him being a devotee, but let's just make sure he doesn't go deep. Under no circumstances, let's keep him superficial. Let's keep him distracted. So he just about gets the basics done and doesn't go any deeper than that. It's one of Maya's tricks. Yeah. Okay. So I hope that answers your question, Marie.
That was amazing. And also, I was thinking that in another one of your classes, you were asking the audience, how to know where Maya will attack you the best is where you're weakest in spiritual life.
Yes, yes.
So reading, it could be one place that Maya could attack us very much.
Oh, it happens so much. And I'll tell you, she can be ruthless, because what happens is, I've seen how she attacks the devotees in this area. I was looking at this even recently. So what happens is, first of all, they didn't study. So because they didn't study and they didn't ask questions on things that they didn't understand, then later on they hit something, and now it becomes a huge philosophical issue, because they're finding it hard to digest that particular point. But if they studied, and if they had done that regularly, then what happens is, when they come across something difficult, it's no longer difficult. Why? Because something is easy or hard to digest based upon context. For example, if I truly accept I'm not the body, that becomes the basis of understanding different patterns of different bodies. And it's easy to accept, because just like your maths, right? You first have to understand 1 + 1 = 2. Then when you get to decimal points, fractions, all these things, it's easy to accept, because the more complicated understanding is based upon a previous foundation of understanding. So if you jump over, then when you're hit with a more advanced concept or idea, you've got no foundation. And because the foundation wasn't there, now that's really hard to digest. And to be honest, Maya is very powerful, very strong. You know, what we should do, because she's powerful, we should always try to take shelter. If we take shelter, as strong as she is, we will always be able to keep moving forward. Anyway, thank you. I saw, so Mataji Sumitira, would you be okay if I answer Kalindi's question and then come to you? Is that okay?
Absolutely, Prabhu. That was the intent. Thank you.
Yeah, just because it will give more people an opportunity to ask. But I do want to hear your question, so please hold on to that. Kalindi, did you have a question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, are you hearing me?
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. So, Prabhuji, my question is, thank you for encouraging how much regular basis you have to read Prabhupada books. So, Prabhuji, I am reading with my kids. I have 2 kids, and they are homeschool kids. So that is the basic of the home school means Bhagavatam. So, Monday to Friday Bhagavatam, Saturday is Bhagavad Gita, and Sunday Chaitanya Charitamrita. That is the way of going. So they're hearing me. They know this is not only mother. I'm also their teacher. They're going to sit with me here, but they also looking for story. The story is always. I also like story. In the Bhagavatam when stories start. So sometime I think that I have to push a little bit. Sometimes they little bit restless because so what I have to do on that case?
Okay, I'm going to share with you something that I've been meditating on a lot, and this relates to your question. My early years in Krishna consciousness were, they were just fantastic. It was just it's just all, and even to this day, I'm feeding off the enthusiasm from my early, it was just such an incredible, magical time. Now, the question I asked myself was why? And when I meditated like that, my conviction is that Krishna gave me a particular perception and a particular insight that could be useful for you. I'll link this to a conversation I had with one devotee who was born in Krishna consciousness. And they were talking about how they know devotees, friends of theirs, who are not into Krishna consciousness. And the reason for it is because it was forced upon them, right? And then the example that was given is that they were forced to come to morning class, Bhagavatam class, and the class was not designed for them. It's spoken at the level of adults, and therefore they're young. So what I realized is that wherever our movement has been successful, one of the underlying formulas which has allowed it to be successful is that the particular audience who are being offered Krishna consciousness are offered Krishna consciousness according to the nature of their situation and according to their nature as well. So when I look at that, then I think, okay, for a young person, as you said, Kalindi, which I think is completely correct, Kalindi Sundari, young people, they need stories, right? If we're going to transmit this teaching, it needs to be done in a way that they find to be fun. It should be done within a time frame that works for them, right? So it's still giving them Krishna consciousness, but it's designed according to their nature, their situation. And then what will happen is, because it was done according to their nature and their situation at this time, then as they grow older and mature, their nature, their situation, their capacity changes, and they'll be the most enthusiastic people who still want to move forward in that area. Because I feel very strongly about this, because if we don't do that, it may seemingly be the case that they're taking it in now, but there's a great chance or likelihood that they'll reject it later on, because they felt that it was it wasn't done, it wasn't made in a way that was accessible to them at this particular time. So I think you're doing amazing. First of all, I think that there's an amazing opportunity to, yes, as you said, give them stories. Give it to them in a time frame that works for them. Not too long that they become restless, right? But maybe choose, all right, this is the amount of time that they can concentrate at this age. Fantastic. Make it fun. Maybe have dramas. Maybe they act out different pastimes and things in the books. Whatever way works according to their nature. This is the trick of this is the secret of humility. Prabhupada, I was again listening to Prabhupada, the memories of Prabhupada, and one devotee was mentioning how he asked Prabhupada, how do we speak to leaders? How do we preach to leaders? He said, you go with straw between your teeth, right? And you may look at that and think, oh, it just means to be just very externally meek and humble. No. Humility is actually very practical. Maybe we'll do this in another seminar, but I'll give you the essence of it now. Humility actually relates to the ability to put someone else in the center, you see? And to meditate on them in the center. So we know that Krishna is in the center for us. But also, even more than that, actually, Krishna's devotees are in the center for us, because those same devotees who are in the center for us are actually the center for Krishna. In the devotee's mind, Krishna is in the center. In Krishna's mind, it's the devotees in the center. What does this mean practically? It means that whichever audience I want to give Krishna consciousness to, if I put them in the center, which means practically I meditate on where are they? What are their interests? What are their needs, concerns? And what's going on for them? And then based upon having a real understanding of where they are, I then present Krishna consciousness in a way that will be accessible, relevant, and digestible to them, right? That's the formula. So the same thing with your children. If you think, what do they need as a young child? And then how can I give them Krishna consciousness in a way that's aligned with those needs? They need fun. They need, they need to learn. They need to grow. They need play. They need stimulation. They need creativity. They need expression. So it's about giving Krishna consciousness in a way that really ticks those boxes. And if you do that, their enthusiasm over time will just simply grow. It will simply grow. Does that help in any way, shape, or form, Kalindi Sundari?
Yes, Prabhu. It's not like pushing away anything.
No.
I understand. I also see the different results. Sometimes parents are devotee, kids are not devotee. Sometimes so I give them choice. I give them different choice, because later nobody can tell that I push them. Therefore, I give them choice. You can go to school. We can do evening little Bhagavatam, but not regular basis. I don't know, depend on the school, they will be very tired. And I also told, you can, with me, you are here because for Bhagavatam. But so you choose. I give them choice, but they choose me. They told that, I told, suppose today is appearance day of Bhavana Dev, and you will be in school. You can come home, you have feast, but you're not going to have other thing. They told that I sit in the school, I'm going to think of Bhamanadev appearance there. So like this, they're understanding that is the way better I stay, and it will go, So this is not pushing at all.
No, not at all. I don't think you're pushing them at all. I want to recognize that. I'll be honest. I'm just going to say it. I see that the mothers in our movement, they go above and beyond. And I personally think that there's a lot of scope that we're missing in genuinely appreciating the hard work that the mothers do to bring up the next generation. So I'm not in any way saying that. If anything, I'm inspired by how hard you're endeavoring to help your children in that sense. All I was trying to suggest is you may want to experiment with different ways of presenting the teachings to them. That's what I'm saying. So I was encouraging what you said. You may want to try different stories, see if they like stories. You may want to try different dramas and see if they like that. I think what you're doing is fantastic, but I'm suggesting trying different things and seeing what's the most inspiring way for them to receive the teaching.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I should think. I should think about that. And another question, Prabhuji, is it okay? Like sometime those senior than me, but close to me, sometimes for their so much they have to do, they don't read regular basis Bhagavatam. Then I become very strict with that until and I will be not a proper until I hear that they read a Bhagavatam. So basically, for example, like for my husband, like he is like it, he read it, but I have to keep reminding. Sometimes he's so much to do, but I will be not normal until like sometimes I have to push. I just see, I understand you're doing so many things, and you're doing for us and doing for Krishna or temple here donation, but you see your time is coming. By the time children grow up, we have to go. You have to be pushed up. And I saw, so sometimes I become, I'm like this kind of person. If I need, something have to done. You took initiation, you have to do this. So it's okay to sometimes become like this, or I have to be just stay normal, like a. So what is your solution? As I am, what I have to do?
Yes, it's a very good question. So the answer is linking to what we said earlier. It's about the personalism, because for some people, you have a relationship with them that if you push them like that, it will have the positive effect. And they will move forward and they will read. I think, yes, you know what Kalindi Sundari did remind me I need to read. So for some people, if you do it like that, that'll be fantastic. But there may be other people who need a different approach, where if they feel that you're pushing them, then they'll feel, oh, she doesn't understand me and I've already got so much stress and now she's pushing me. So you have to see what would work. So we always work backwards. The goal is to get these people to be inspired, to stay in regular contact with Prabhupada's books and study them. So that's the goal. Then the next thing is, what's the best way to inspire them to do this? So for some person, it may be being very strict. And then they'll be like, you know what, actually, she's right. I should do this. And that may work very well. So you could do that for that person who trusts you. You already have a relationship. And when you do that, they take it very positively and they move forward. For someone else, it may need a different approach. For someone else, it may be, you know what, why don't we read together for 5 minutes? Just to kind of inspire them. Or it may be, I was reading Bhagavatam the other day and I came across this wonderful point by Prabhupada. What are you reading? And then they feel, oh, she's been reading and she's got all these inspiring points and I've not got anything. And then that may inspire them to read. So you have to see, it's actually based upon relationship. So it's not that there's just one approach that works for everyone. Yep. But we should know, based upon our relationship and based upon knowing that particular person, then we can figure out what is the best approach that I can give for them. And sometimes the best approach is not to say anything. Maybe someone else will tell that. Maybe you can share with someone that they're close to. I know your friend and he's a wonderful devotee. I've noticed he doesn't read so much, but I know that you're friends with him, Maybe you could, I think it's good if you could inspire him to read, because that will really help him in his spiritual life. So sometimes it may not even be best to come from us, because we may not have the relationship, but maybe we can tell someone else and that person can inspire the relevant individual. It just requires us to take a moment and to consider, we know what the goal is. Then the question is, what is the best way that we can facilitate that person achieving the goal? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalindi Sundari. Thank you so much. Sumitira, yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for spending so much time. You actually answered a lot of my questions so far, but I'm seeking to get your input as an educator in what we are doing. I'm one of the Sunday school teachers for the children, and we have a diverse group of kids. Some of them are as young as 4, and the oldest is 13, and they're all in one class. And one of our approaches has been, as you mentioned, they love stories, but also working backwards and saying, how can we teach that Nididhyasanam application aspect to them? So for example, when we taught Prithu and Indra's story, we asked them how many of them have felt insecure in their academics or at school or whatever, and how have they dealt with insecurity. And showcasing Indra's story as, if you let this run wild, these are the disastrous consequences that can occur. So I found this on the web. Sorry, my Siri is responding. So and then we end the class always in asking to reflect on what they learned, but we give them prompts. We say, if you were in Prithu's shoes and Brahma told you, give it up, how would you react? Or what did you learn about Indra that you would remember the next time you feel insecure? So we try to, sometimes I feel like, is this part psychotherapy that we are doing? But we try to emphasize that the Bhagavatam is very relevant to your daily lives. And plant that seed. So no, not many kids are reading the Bhagavatam yet, but our hope is that they would be inspired, that they will read it someday.
Yeah, that's good, by the way. They don't have, it's not that we have to force them to read the entire Bhagavatam at an early young age. What we're trying to do is transmit the knowledge of the Bhagavatam in the way that's relevant to them at this time in their journey. That's really important. It's not a question that they have to read the books directly, if they're not ready for that. But we want them to be exposed to the philosophy and the teachings, because that purifies them no matter what.
Absolutely. And we also ask them to write a letter to Srila Prabhupada. At the end of the year, we asked them, of this canto that you read, what was something that surprised you? So many kids hadn't heard about the Ashwatthama Draupadi story, and some of them reflected that they didn't expect that she would forgive. So, and writing a letter to Srila Prabhupada about what they learned from a particular pastime. So are these acceptable approaches, or does it feel like sometimes I feel like, are we making things up, or are we meeting them where they are?
This is acceptable. In fact, not only is it acceptable, it's wanted. It's wanted. See, this is the whole point. And that's one of the reasons why I read that purport. First canto, chapter 4, text number 1. Prabhupada says one has to be able to explain it in a way which is suitable for the audience. You see, that's the point. It has to be interesting and suitable for the audience. Prabhupada, he told his disciples when they were going to preach at the universities, he said, when you go to the universities, he said, do not tell them it's about that Krishna consciousness is about rules and regulations. He said, emphasize that it's a higher philosophy. Again, it's completely relevant to the particular audience. I'll give you one personal example. When Tamal Krishnamaj came to Cambridge to do his PhD, we used to go to serve him, clean the house and do other services for him. And one of the first times I went to see him in Cambridge, I asked him a question. So we were doing some university programs, and the society that we had at the university was called the Spiritual Arts Society. And it was very successful. Many devotees many people became devotees through that program, and they're practicing to this day. Now, we called it the Spiritual Arts Society, and there were other devotees who were speaking at other universities, and they wanted to normalize the brand. They wanted all the societies to be called the Krishna Consciousness Society, and we weren't sure if that was a good idea for the university that we were speaking at. So I asked Tamal Krishnamaj about this. He said, you have to be intelligent enough to know what your audience can take. Right? He said, if they can take it by calling it the Krishna Consciousness Society, you can call it that. He said, if not, you have to find another name. And then he said to me, he said, if Prabhupada was here, he would say, did the books go out? Did Prashadam go out? Did the holy name go out? He said, if these 3 things go out, Prabhupada will say it's a success. So there's many different ways to do things. The point is that you're trying to, our movement has made has failed sometimes because we've been in the mode of passion. So we want to get a quick result. But actually, what we're trying to do is get an exponentially powerful long-term result. It's better to lose the battle and win the war than to win the battle and lose the war. So with your children, you're thinking long-term. You have more influence on their entire life just through their childhood. What you do in their childhood will affect their adulthood. According to Ayurveda, over 90% of a person's character is formed in childhood. What you see the rest of the time in their adult years, it's all really an expansion of how they were brought up primarily, you know. And Parashara Muni's Hora Shastra, he says something similar. He says a person's behavior is based upon three things: their nature, their upbringing, and their association. You see? So going back to what you were saying, it's completely wanted. Make it relevant, make it interesting. Use your creativity to find new ways to present it in a way that inspires them. Watch the response. See what works. See what things that you do which cause them to be more enthusiastic, more energized. See what things cause them to be a little bit, it didn't really work for me. And then use that understanding again and again, because Krishna will feed back to you through the people you're trying to serve. He will show you, oh, they're receptive here. Maybe do more of that. This doesn't work. Maybe we have to look at that and do it slightly differently. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Prabhu. It's been a very iterative process, and I feel like the kids have taught me more than I've given them. So it's been a very rewarding reciprocal process. So thank you very much. It's been very inspirational. I think I'll have to watch your talk again to unpack all what was said. So thank you.
No, thank you. I'm just going to say a little plug. I've got an Instagram, but my legal name, and also we have our SoundCloud. So feel free to connect if you would like to. And also we've got a podcast. I'll just try and send the link to the podcast as well. And are there any other questions? Or if not, I have a tendency to go over time, so you have to forgive me. But if there are, I'm happy to take any questions if people want, or we can end if people need to go about their other activities.
Hare Krishna. Oh.
Prabhuji, 1 minute, what you said, the successfully now said, like if your books, prashad, then what else? And now another one?
Holy name, books, and prashadam.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu. This is Lalita Devi. I've been hearing your talk, but I didn't keep my video on because I was attending to some chores, unfortunately. Please accept my respectful obeisances. All grace to our Guru Maharajas, all grace to Srila Prabhupada. Is it all right that I ask a question?
I'm more than happy to take questions. I just want to check with the organizers. Is that okay? Yep. No? Kajal?
I think we're fine.
We're fine? Okay.
Thank you. We're good. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you. Thank you, Hariswari. Thank you for organizing this talk. It was very enlivening. Yeah, as Sumitra said, I'll have to hear it a few times to assimilate some of it. My question may come across a little touching on the controversy, but I hope I can express my deeper need for clarification of how to keep focused on what matters to my progress the most. But just a little clarification would help, because the mind and the intelligence doesn't always shut up. You may have heard of the famous saying that we read Bible day and night. You read black and I read white.
No, actually, we don't have that in England, but I'm sure that's an interesting saying.
And what you said about decisions, community, affecting community, or something that comes out of good practices or good sadhana is different from ones that that don't have that basis.
It can be, yes.
And if you see two different kind of decisions, one is black and the other is white, coming out of the same practices, how you as an aspiring sadhaka know that Krishna is in the background of everything, and all opposites reconcile in him.
Ultimately, that understanding can come by two things, and one is deeper than the other. One is accepting on faith because Prabhupada is explained like that. That's one way. But to be honest with you, we can understand it by realization. Let's be very clear. Even by logic, we can understand we're not in control of everything. I mean, we've all, as a global society, since February or March 2020, we've all been in a global pandemic. If people were in control, would this happen? I don't think anyone here would say, if I'm in control, I would make sure this wouldn't happen. We're not in control. If we just look at the events that happen in our lives, and not just us, we can look at other people's lives. The moment you see another person who has things happening in their life that they don't want, that means that they're not in control. So it's a logical thing. So it's not even a question of faith. Anyone who's logical can see that we're not the controller. Because if we were the controller, there will be things which have happened to us which we would not have let to happen. And there will be things which haven't happened, we would have made sure that they did happen if we were actually in control. That's the first point. So there's a deeper point here. And the deeper point is, by good sadhana, it helps us to do two things. It helps us to understand the things that we can influence and to influence them in a way which is positive and Krishna conscious. By good sadhana, it also helps us to see the things that we can't influence. And it helps us to be accepting of those differences. You see? Otherwise, the danger is there's something that happens, I don't think it's right. And then because I don't deeply accept that Krishna is ultimately in charge, I think, how is Krishna allowing this to happen? But Krishna does allow this to happen. This is in the 4th canto. I'll be very honest. There was in one country, there was an authority, and this authority had a tendency to be a bit harsh with people. Okay, so one day the authority gave a class, and he said, "Look, Prabhupada says, do not blame the instrument of your karma." And what he was doing is he was using the philosophy to say, look, even though I'm harsh, you shouldn't say that I'm a bad person because, I'm just the instrument of your karma. It's your own fault. That's what he was trying to say. So the next day, one guru, Prabhupada disciple, came and gave class. And I think this person found out what this other person had said the day before. So then they clarified the philosophy properly, right? So they said that not everything that happens is Krishna's will. Okay, very, very interesting point. Not everything that happens is Krishna's will. And they gave a good example. They said that Krishna does not will that the cows be slaughtered. But what happens is he sanctions, meaning that in the heart of the cow, he sees that because of your karma, you have to die today. And in the heart of the hunter, he sees you want to kill an animal. So if you want to kill an animal, I'm not telling you to kill an animal, but if you want to kill an animal, kill this one. So Bhagavad Gita, Krishna directs the wanderings of the living entities. He doesn't, but we're still held responsible because it's our desire. But what he does is he coordinates between the person who has the desire and the person who has the karma to be on the receiving end of that desire. So there's a difference between what Krishna wills and what Krishna sanctions. Now, knowing that difference, if we do our sadhana properly, what happens is we become like Arjuna, right? I was explaining this to some devotees recently because they were saying, how do you know whether you should intervene or not? And the formula that Krishna shows us on the pages of the Bhagavad Gita is he says to Arjuna, you do your duty. right? You do what you're meant to do and then leave the result to me, right? So you make the endeavor that you're meant to make, and then whatever the outcomes are, then you have to understand that was ultimately Krishna's sanction, right? For example, let's say that you have just had a child, right? So the parents have to have an income, okay? They don't say, well, Krishna's the doer, Krishna's in charge. If I don't go and work, the bills will automatically be paid. The child will automatically be fed because, I'm not the doer. No. It doesn't work like that, right? Krishna is the ultimate doer, meaning that the endeavor that we make has to be sanctioned by him for it to be successful. But we still have a role to play, okay? So to your point, what I'd say to you is the way that you reconcile things is actually like this. The way you reconcile, taking it to a very practical level, the first way to reconcile everything in community is to have good relationships, or as good as you can with everyone. What that does by having good relationships is it allows you to have influence when and where necessary. So then when a situation comes, you, by your association and by the good relationship you build, you can then try your best to influence the situation. And the influence should be, you're trying to influence it to be as best as it can be in the way that Prabhupada and Krishna would want. And then having done your best in each and every situation, then we have to have that detachment that when we've tried and if for some reason it didn't work out, then okay, it means that I did my best, but then Krishna didn't allow it to turn out in a certain way. And that may be because certain people have to go through some kind of experience. It may be because Krishna has seen that there's something I didn't consider. So I thought we should make this decision, but I didn't know that actually Krishna's like, I know your intention is good, but you don't know that there's some other things which are going to happen. So therefore, it's actually better that we move things in this direction. And you'll find out later on that actually this is a better decision, even though you don't know this now. There's a story behind this. There's a king, and the king is given a gift of a very valuable sword, jewel-encrusted sword. So the king is one day cleaning the sword. And while he's cleaning the sword is very sharp. He cuts his finger and he's in great pain. So the king calls for his advisor and he says, my dear advisor, I was given this gift of a sword. I was cleaning the sword and I cut my finger. What do you have to say about this? The advisor says to him, my dear king, this is Krishna's will. Right? This is Krishna's blessing. Actually, that's what he says. And the king becomes angry. How dare you say this to me? You impudent, foolish advisor. I've cut my finger, I'm bleeding, I'm in pain, and you have the audacity to tell me this is Krishna's blessing. And he says, guards, throw this foolish advisor of mine in prison. So the guards grab the advisor, throw him in prison. Then the king later on that day, he goes on his tour of the kingdom. As he's going on his tour of the kingdom, he actually comes to the forest. And when he comes to the forest, he actually comes to, as he's going through the forest, he gets captured by some cannibals who live deep in the forest. And they see the king, and when they see the king, the first thing that comes to mind is, prasadam, right? So they grab the king, they're preparing to use him, they gave him to the priest. The priest is, give me 1 second. Just have to slide something very quickly. The priest is preparing the king for a human sacrifice. Midway through the ritual, the priest turns to the cannibals and said, let the king go, let this person go. And they were shocked. They said, why? And he said, look at his hand. He's an imperfect specimen. Part of his finger is missing. We can't use him in the human sacrifice. You have to let him go. So the king comes back to the palace relieved. And then he understands the wisdom of his advisor. So he tells the guards, bring my advisor back out of prison. And he apologizes to the advisor. And he says, my dear advisor, when I told you I'd cut my finger, you told me it was Krishna's mercy, Krishna's blessing, but I didn't understand. But when I went to the forest, I was caught by cannibals. They would have killed me and sacrificed me. But because part of my body was missing, they let me go. And so the king says, I'm so sorry. I'm very grateful. Thank you. He said, but I have one question. He said, I understand how culling my finger was Krishna's blessing upon me. But when you told me, I became angry and had you thrown in prison. So I don't understand how it was Krishna's blessing on you. So the advisor said to him, he said, my dear king, he said, normally when you go on your tour of the kingdom, normally I accompany you. He said, so actually what would have happened is they would have let you go and they would have sacrificed me instead. So when you cut your finger, that was Krishna's blessing upon you. And when you had me thrown in prison, that was Krishna's blessing upon me. So to your point, Mataji, because Krishna sees things from a much broader perspective, something that we may see as negative right now, and it may even be negative right now, can at the same time be for the ultimate well-being of all concerned in the longer period. Does that make some sense?
Very grateful, Prabhu. You just echoed a recent personal instruction from Giriraj Maharaj, where he said, focus on the circle of influence.
Wonderful. Yeah, see, that's one way that we know the message is coming from Krishna, because it keeps coming again and again through different sources. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very grateful. Very grateful.
No, we're very grateful to be able to serve you all.